Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about Norsca in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires and about the changes that Creative Assembly should make to this particular race. With patch 6.0 we are going to get, hopefully, races improved, and one of those races that comes up again and again and again in polls is Norsca. The reason behind this is Norsca, although Norsca does have a potentially powerful army and can do quite well on the campaign, they do have some severe issues. It's more so about fixing problems as opposed to the situation that many other races have where their units aren't that great, or their casualty replenishment is terrible, or their income is terrible. Though Norsca's income leaves a lot to be desired. But still, you can certainly make a significant amount of money playing as Norsca in a campaign. However, one of the bigger problems that they'll have in their campaign is that their progress will be fairly slow for a fairly long time. Like, if you're willing to endure that, you can certainly end up steamrolling the map, but you do have to play a fairly long campaign. And I don't know about you, but for me personally, doing that in the Immortal Empires map, or in where turns take a very long time, or not necessarily much is happening every single turn, is not really the most fun experience. I think like the most fun races to play are ones where you do have a lot going for you from the very beginning of the campaign. For Norsca is a slow trek, but the power is there. But let's talk about the problems Norsca has. When it comes to their income on land is pretty pathetic. In fact, Creative Assembly deliberately nerfed them on land with the patch in Warhammer 3. I don't quite understand that. It's not like Norsca was such a dominant faction, or beforehand they weren't. But what Creative Assembly did is like, oh, we want them to be naval aggressors. So they do generate a good amount of income from their ports, but keep in mind, ports of course are expensive structures, and they're quite vulnerable because while the AI will not cover a significant distance to attack you via land, they will do so via the sea, even if only just to sack your settlement and screw you over, more or less. So Norsca does have a defensive issue as a result of how their income works. So your income can be decent, but it does cost more to get that kind of decent income, and on top of that, it is more vulnerable than many other races. I think that it does make sense for Norsca to focus on naval aggression, but the way Creative Assembly decided to do that when nerfing their land-based income wasn't really that great. I mean, you could easily double the income from a tier 1 settlement, and still a port would be worth it more because it gives you growth, it gives you casualty replenishment. You do want ports, so I really don't quite understand what CA was doing. Norsca itself as a territory is annoying to say the least, because it's large, it's surrounded on all sides by the sea, and it's hard to defend it. On top of that, because of the way Norscan diplomacy works, you're quite likely going to end up in a war with all the other Norscan factions. At least the ones over here in Norsca, not the ones that are minor factions, vassal factions for the Warriors of Chaos. The problem with that is it will result in you having to face some very difficult battles if you don't know what's coming, with the Varg, with Trog over here in this particular campaign. But beyond that, it gives you a large amount of territory that you have to spend a good amount of money to develop, and that it is difficult to actually defend it, even if you do succeed. Or I suppose you could decide not to confederate other factions, but that would be the worst possible decision. One of the things Norsca does have going in its favor is that they can diplomatically vassalize with other factions. Over here, I was able to diplomatically vassalize Frat and Azak. Also, I was able to do it with Festus. So yes, you can do it by abusing the diplomacy system and abusing the vassal system, but that doesn't necessarily mean Norsca is powerful. Their unit roster, however, if you can get access to it, can be pretty solid. Like Marauder Champions, heavily armored, very durable units, expensive, however. Norscan Ice Trolls, pretty decent. Skin Wolves, armored Skin Wolves, fairly solid units that can that can brutalize your enemies. But the problem is, with respect to this, like Marauder Champions, and skin wolves, armored skin wolves, alongside other units, they do just take longer to recruit. And you don't necessarily have the economy to support those units, and you certainly don't have the time to waste it in any campaign spending extra turns to recruit those units. But you can absolutely make it work if you're willing to endure past other issues as well. Now, generally, with a faction or a race that has poor baseline income, the way it works, the way you make it work, is by having good income from looting and sacking settlements. And Norsca does so. They can get biblical amounts of money from looting and sacking settlements. But, and there is a big but with this, the way they balance the race, the way they design the race, does harm you significantly in that. So you already have a pretty weak income unless you're using ports. You can gain a good amount of income from looting and sacking settlements, but you'd also, one of the main campaign mechanics that you have to deal with during the course of your campaign is to get allegiance with the gods. This is essential to be able to achieve your short campaign victory condition, your long campaign victory condition. If you don't gain favor of these gods, you won't win, plain and simple. And these favors do give you a significant amount of benefits. Now, balancing these gods can be tricky because, let's say, if I build favor with Slaanesh, which is the serpent, and then I start building favor with Khorne, then every favor I gain with Khorne will cause me to lose Slaaneshi favor. So going undivided is difficult. That isn't necessarily the issue, though it certainly does make it annoying, but still, the benefits are there. And at tier 2, with each of these, you do get 40% income from ports, which, yeah, it ends up being pretty damn substantial. Not quite entirely certain if it stacks, because actually gaining that kind of favor with the gods is really, really annoying. Because the main way of gaining favor with the gods is to raise settlements. Not sack them, raise them. And unlike some other races, Wood Elves, Valkia, Scarbrand, who do gain a significant amount of money when they're raising settlements, you get squat. You get favor with the gods, but that's about it. You're going to lose all that income that you would have gained if you had sacked the settlement. Now, sure, you could sack a settlement and then next turn, but you're wasting time. On top of that, you don't have the benefits that someone like Valkia, the Beastman, all that, they do have when raising settlements. You don't gain movement points. So the problem with raising settlements, the problem with a mechanic that forces you to raise settlements is that it leaves you incredibly vulnerable on the campaign map, which is an issue, a major issue to have to deal with, because the reason it's such a major issue, you're going to lose the remainder of your movement points. You won't be able to replenish that turn in that region. And you are going to be stuck in a position where another army can come in. So looking at the situation over here, like I am certainly at war with the Empire and with Vlad. And right here, if I say to where to sack Essen with my army, what would end up happening, or one of my armies, what would end up occurring here, like if I had an army here, is like another faction would be able to take advantage of that. Having to sacrifice all of your movement points to be able to get a faction resource is not a great choice. This is one of the things Creative Assembly has understood with other races that also sack settlements, but not Norsca. This is where Norsca is far behind other races. They do need to get movement points when they're raising settlements, and they need to get money when they're raising settlements, because the campaign dynamic is quite miserable to deal with otherwise. And then there is the other main campaign mechanic that Norsca does have, the monster hunts. Now, the monster hunts do give you some fairly tangible benefits. They give you some favor with the gods, but you'll generally get more if you're just continuously raising settlements. But they also give you very powerful monstrous units, like the Cold Voider over here, the Frostworm. The problem with this system is it's using the old quest system that we had from Warhammer 1. Because remember, Norsca was developed for Warhammer 1. It was introduced as pre-order bonus for Warhammer 2, but it was originally introduced in Warhammer 1. And that system, well, plainly sucks. Beyond the steps that are required, like, oh, go raid Mindenheim, which is controlled, by the way, by Festus in this case. Go raid Mindenheim. The problem that you get over here, beyond having to do those kind of steps, they do give you some rewards, but it is a hassle. But beyond having to deal with the steps, it can break. So say, for instance, let's say Norland over here takes out Festus. Now, that is incredibly unlikely, but let's say they take Mindenheim. Okay, the quest will likely still be there, but let's say Festus comes back and takes it back from them. Then the quest breaks. That's just an example. And you have many other examples where these monster hunts do break. And they do give you tangible benefits in a campaign. So it is quite an issue to deal with. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, reading on this, I could be wrong on this. I haven't completed a long campaign victory with Norsca in a very long time. But unless I'm mistaken, you actually do need to do these challenges in order to win this campaign. Pretty certain about that, actually. So if you're not able to do this, again, you're going to struggle finishing a campaign. So lots of issues with dealing, like, there's just problems, the balancing problems, the design issues, the dynamics of income versus favor with the gods, which you shouldn't have that problem. Like, just, yeah, okay, we have to raise Salamence. But give us money for doing so. And fix the monster hunts. Or just flat out remove all the steps. And it's like, if you start the hunt, you can go into the quest battle or into the battle against that particular monster and eliminate it. That's what Norsca needs. Also, I don't understand why, like, Marauder champions and some other units have a 2-turn recruitment. It's not like there aren't units that can't compete against these guys that are recruited in 1 turn. At least give us a way of easily reducing that. Another problem, I would argue, with Norsca is the way that their replenishment is handled. Now, and this, by the way, touches on a major issue. Their lore choices, like the Marauder Chieftains, yeah, they suck. Like, they need another lore choice, or they need an improvement to the Marauder Chieftains. Now, the way you improve replenishment as Norsca, you can get Norse Resilience, and then eventually Unnatural Healing. Okay, but there is a hero that does give you replenishment. The problem is, you cannot get these heroes until tier 4. And Norsca, while it doesn't have the worst growth in the world, they certainly don't have the best either. So it will take you a very, very long time to be able to start recruiting Bale Fiends, and replenishment will also be an issue. This is a problem for a race that, while it does have some heavily armored units, like Skin Wolves, Norscan Ice Trolls, and Marauder Champions, many units, like especially on the lower tier, don't have good don't have good armor, so they'll take a significant amount of damage in battles, be it manual battles or auto-resolve battles. Like, yeah, an army like this, or the 2 armies that I have over here in the north, they'll do decently well, no problem, but other armies will not handle things so very well. And yeah, the Lord situation and hero situation needs to be improved, or at least Battlefiends should be a tier 3 hero that you get. Like, at least getting 1 at tier 3 would make things better, I would argue. And that would be about it. Norsca does need some help, and I think it's very telling that all of the races that generally would pre-order DLC ends up being fucking terrible in Total War games. I mean, Warriors of Chaos are really good right now, but when they originally launched, they were pretty terrible. And I think I can only think of, like, the Amazons in Troy being good, but while they were a pre-order bonus DLC, they did not come out on day 1. The Amazons are strong in Troy, but they were not the day 1 DLC. I think day 1 DLC needs to fucking end, because we've seen the quality of it. Like, you end up in the situation where the races they release, like, Norsca was good for a Warhammer 1 race when it came out, but it was really terrible for a Warhammer 2 race when they introduced it. Or not necessarily so terrible, but it was behind, and now they're far behind. Then you have the Ogre situation, you had the Warriors of Chaos situation beforehand. Athens, Sparta, and Epirus were pretty solid in Rome too, but many of these day 1 DLC packs end up being atrocious. And the problem ends up being in the long term, not necessarily in the short term, because you will realize in the long term, like these races will just not receive the level of support that other races would. Then again, we're talking about Creative Assembly, which hasn't updated the bloody dwarves since they launched them in Warhammer 1, a real update. So yeah, Creative Assembly's priorities are not necessarily the best all the time. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.